Right, Mr. Rhodes, over to you. We are now live.
Right, okay, we'll get started. So welcome everyone to this meeting of the County Council's Employment Committee, and we'll begin with minutes of the meeting held on the 3rd of December 2020. Are we all happy that they are a true and accurate record? Is that seconded, Mr. Shepherd?
Yes, seconded,
Chairman. Thank you. No one disagree? Can't see any hands anywhere. No. Okay. Question time. I had no questions reported to me either under item 2 or 3, nor any items which are urgent under item 4. Are there any declarations of interest? I can't see any response. I assume that's negative. So that brings us to item 6, which is the people strategy, which we did consider at our last meeting, and then we asked for a further report, which we now have. So who is going to begin with that? Is that you, Gordon?
Caroline's going to take us through it.
Caroline.
Yes,
right,
thank you. Thanks very much, Chair.
Right.
So this report presents further information to the Employment Committee, which was requested at the meeting held on the 3rd of December 2020. The information is in relation to the development of the Council's People Strategy for 2020-2024, namely the outcomes that were achieved by the previous People Strategy, the date of which was 2017 to 2020, the outcomes of the evaluation exercise that was undertaken on that previous people strategy, which informed the development of our new people strategy, which we're asking Employment Committee to consider today, and also the SMART targets that have been set for each of the key deliverables for year 1 of the delivery of the People Strategy Plan. So this report seeks the approval for the People Strategy of 2020-2024. The background section, which covers paragraphs 5 to 8, sets out the approach taken to develop our new people strategy. It makes reference to the evaluation that was undertaken on the impact of the previous people strategy, the 3 themes that were chosen to give clear structure to the new strategy, and how the new strategy takes into full consideration the impact that COVID-19 has had on our workforce, but in particular the need for many of our workforce to now work remotely. And finally, how the new people strategy will support the Council's Ways of Working programme. Paragraph 9 sets out the themes of the previous people strategy, and at Appendix B, which has just been included for information, is a list of all the products that were produced as a consequence of the last people strategy in order to implement it. I'm not planning on going through all of Appendix B with you, but of course happy to take questions at the end of the presentation if anybody in particular would like to ask any questions on any of those listed. The evaluation of the people strategy for 2017-2020 is set out in paragraphs 11 and 12, and it also includes the question that was asked in order to gather the data, which was necessary to assess the impact, the success of the people strategy upon our organisation. It refers to all the documentation that was referred to, and also that was as part of the literature review, and also the methodology that was adopted. And just as a reminder, this evaluation was undertaken by our data and BI team, so it was undertaken independently. Paragraph 13 consists of a table which presents a high-level summary of the results, including the link between these and the work that has been taken forward in our new people strategy for 2020-2024. The results are presented under each of the themes of the people strategy, and overall may be summarised as saying good progress was made within each of the themes, but further work to embed the Council's expectations is required, hence our new people strategy. Of particular note, I would like to highlight that managers have now got greater confidence in dealing with performance issues. Our values and behaviours are in the main being demonstrated across the council, and the annual performance review is a really good improvement upon the previous performance development review process. There is good leadership within the organisation, and that has been found to be embedded really well by the data and BI team. And there is an excellent foundation in place for smarter working as we move forward, in particular for the Ways of Working programme. The Council's approach as Employment Committee, I'm sure will appreciate from previous reports, to wellbeing is well established to a great extent. Additional work will be undertaken to support the Council's diversity and inclusion agenda. This will include, amongst other things, a refresh of our Equalities Charter and the implementation of a BAME Workers Action Plan, part of which will be in support of progression of our BAME workforce to management and leadership positions. Moving on to page 16 of the report, paragraphs 14 through to 19 covers the development of the People Strategy for 2020-2024. Built upon the evaluation results and the recommendations, it sets out the Council's approach to leadership and management, the importance of sustained performance and productivity, achieving a good work-life balance, and the importance of our values and behaviours within our organisation and the part they have to play in our culture. For each of the themes in the new People Strategy, which are performance management, leadership and management, and workplace and culture, there is a set of deliverables and there are clear project plans in place to support delivery. On pages 17 to 22, there is a table which has been presented. It's a high-level overview of our work programme for the first year of our new People Strategy. Each project has been listed and builds on the information that was presented to Employment Committee on the 3rd of December by including information on benefits, targets, measurements and timeframes. An overall summary of that table would be that we will continue to build on our skills, experience and knowledge of our managers, increasing their capability and performance management and productivity. This will be in the context of our Ways of Working programme. Clear development pathways will be put in place to support career progression and succession planning. Further support on mental and physical wellbeing will be introduced. There will be an introduction of a new recruitment portal, which is very much hoped will attract high calibre candidates to work for Leicestershire County Council. And of course, we will continue to progress the work on attendance management and capability. Page 23, paragraph 23 sets out the resource requirements to undertake this work, and as Employment Committee will see, we have secured some additional resource to be able to do this work to the timeframes we would like to do it to. And paragraph 23 sets out the recommendation, which is for Employment Committee to approve the draft People Strategy for 2020-2024. So that concludes my presentation, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that. Okay, I'll take the speakers first before I say any more. And Mrs. Newton has her hand up, and then Mr. Shepherd.
Thank you very much. I have to say, I was at the Stonewall Awards getting the award for FAR when I saw the council employees going forward for their award, and it was really ever so pleased to see that was happening. My question really is around COVID and the good work that's being done, and whether or not COVID is a barrier to actually ensuring that that any further training is needed, that you're able to deliver it in COVID times. Thank you.
Yes, a very good question, in that in terms of our learning and development for the future, we are undertaking quite a significant project on making sure that the way in which we can deliver training and development can be delivered on a remote working basis. It's going to be absolutely imperative going forward. And of course, on developing the different methods of training, what we will do is to make sure that they're thoroughly tested through our EHRIA process. So there are no barriers to anyone in our workforce being able to take the training that they would like to undertake to progress, for example, or their manager may equally like them to undertake. So we have picked that up.
May I follow up?
Yes, please.
Thank you. The question is, I know quite a number of the workforce are working from home. Indeed, my next door neighbours one. And I just wanted to ask, do they have the proper facilities and equipment to make sure that they can do the job properly? Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. We have done a tremendous amount of work to make sure that people working from home do have the right equipment and do have the right work set up from a health and safety perspective. So there is a requirement for them to undertake an assessment to check that through with their manager, and of course any equipment that they would need in addition to what we already supply, we can provide further equipment. We have also introduced a £200 allowance, which allows employees to be able to claim expenses for equipment that will really help and support them from being able to work from home. So that's in place. And I think it's also fair to say that through our IT rollout programme, that everybody should now be in receipt of a laptop, good equipment, etc. on the INT side. So yes, I would say that's all in place.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shepherd.
Thank you, Chairman. The words leaders and managers are frequently used in the document. And I'm sorry if this is a sort of rather stupid or blindingly obvious thing to ask, but is it absolutely clear whether they are different people, different terms, or is it expected that all managers are leaders? I ask the question because it's a very good document, and I also want to feel confident that it communicates successfully to all staff. If you're a manager, are you also a leader? A bit like the old term supervisor, used to be used, is now, I hope, replaced by things like team leaders, which is a much better way, I think, getting results from colleagues than the word supervisor was. So that's my question, really. Is it really clear if managers are also leaders, or are these two separate entities? Is one somehow senior? Thank you, Chairman.
Well, there you are, Caroline. There's a question for you.
It is a question, isn't it? And it's one that we have put an awful lot of thought in, as you can imagine. The leaders of our organisation are our senior managers. So we term our leaders to be those senior managers from a grading perspective on grade 15 and above. And we expect people of that grade, it's made very clear that they have a clear leadership role, not only within their service area, but within the whole organisation. So people of that grade will also be members of departmental management teams, other senior leadership teams, etc. Whereas managers go up to grade 14. And although we do have similar expectations, then of course they are not in that position of attending those senior meetings. So I think that's the best way I can describe it. And what we do try and make sure is that comes across as clearly as what we are able to present it in our policies and other documentation that's relevant.
May I come back, Chairman?
Yes, please.
Well, to come back to say thank you very much. And I think it's really helpful, at least to me anyway, to understand that there's actually a grade salary definition, which is helpful to understand, as it were, where leaders are. That's helpful, thank you, because I just wanted to feel confident that all staff were given the clarity they're entitled to, as whether they are leaders or managers or both. Thank you very much.
What's the pay grade when the first person appears with the title manager?
Oh, now I would say that would be grade 13.
Right. So the managers are in this narrow band, or band
Yes.
13, 14 then, aren't they? And at 15, they probably still have the title manager, but they're sort of super managers called leaders.
Yes.
Yes. What
Yes.
are councillors?
An irritation, aren't they?
Do you want me to try and answer
Super,
that?
super lead.
Is that the collective name for councillors? do you
So,
think?
may I come back more seriously to say,
Yeah.
with all respect, don't want to be too picky, Caroline, but you said you would say about grade 13. In my
Yes.
thirst for clarity, I'd like to feel confident that there was quite definitely, if possible, a grade where managers start.
Yes.
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, the reason for the slight hesitation is that we have senior practitioners. So I'm going to probably end up complicating matters even further now. So apologies for this. But we have senior practitioners in our organisation, particularly in areas such as adult social care, who do have team management responsibility, but they are more of a senior practitioner because they lead on those complex cases, using social work as an example, whereas a grade 13 is more aligned to management responsibility. So it's not, I can't make it any sort of more defined than that, but I would say 13 would be the team manager grade, certainly from a job evaluation perspective. So I can actually come at it from a different angle, if you like. So from a job evaluation perspective, team managers are 13. Grade 12s are senior practitioners, but can be team managers, but more senior practitioners. And then grade 14s are the higher level team managers. And then we are into our senior management structure within the organisation, which is grade 15 and above.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. I think Gordon was going to give a more useful answer than mine to your question, wasn't he, about what councillors are?
Gordon's staying silent for the moment.
I was
I'm
hoping
going to
you'd
ask him
forgotten
another
that.
question.
I think
I mean, we have this we have this hierarchical system where the grades start. Well, it used to start at 1, but now we've abolished 1 and almost abolished 2, I think, and we start at 3, which is interesting. And then we go up, in theory, to 20, don't we? With some individuals beyond 20 who are not counted as part of it all, but really are. We used to go to 22 at one point, I used to notice.
Chief Exec is on 22. Chief Exec's on 22, yeah.
Is there any merit in having a much flatter organisation and taking out, over 20 grades in there now still? Suppose we only had 10, what would happen?
I think it's something that comes up every now and then, and I guess one of the challenges we had 2 years ago with the major pay review that was done nationally, it was exactly what you said was happening, which was low pay was being squeezed. So we were finding that grades were overlapping. So you had I'm going to go back to terminology now, you had a situation where perhaps a supervisor in a kitchen was only paid a few pence an hour more than the kitchen assistant, and where's the motivation in that? So a lot of work was done to reframe the grading system nationally, and then obviously what we had to do was look to how we applied that to our local grades, which are obviously formulated under the Hay scheme. You could reduce the number of grades. Potentially, though, you'd be broadening them, so you'd have a wider range through which you'd be paying, and that could increase pay costs potentially, because arguably what we'd still need is that whole range. So we'd need, from the posts that are graded just over £9 an hour, right through to the chief executive, because you have to look at the wider market, and you'd almost be into a very different kind of pay structure. And we've talked in the fairly distant past about performance related pay and things like that. So these things come and go. But I think I would argue that we've got, in fact, we've got the equal pay audit on the on the agenda for later on, so that kind of fits. But we've got an equality proofed and as fair as it can be job evaluation scheme and grading system that sits on top of that. I know that we're, you know, and we have regular conversations about market premia, and that's in some ways where you pitch your grading system. You know, do we want to be, and can we afford to be, an upper quartile payer, for example, or do we have to pump prime some roles when we have, you know, shortages and specialist roles that we struggle to fill, or we struggle to retain people. So I think, again, to summarise, I'd argue that we've broadly got the right sort of grading structure in place.
Yes, I can see you would be reluctant to meddle with it, as it were. I mean, it's people are reasonably content, but does it really work for us? Is the question I'm asking.
Yeah,
because nothing in the Hay system which says that we should have 20 grades or 10 grades or 5 grades or any grades in so many ways. It simply talks about a score, which from a combination of factors gives a certain worth to a job, which then we put in a slot somewhere and say that's grade whatever it is. But then we then sort of have a range of pay, don't we, which starts at an entry level and then goes up automatically with experience in the job over 4 increments usually, and then it's capped at that ceiling unless the individual then can move on to another grade, which probably means variation or another job. And no doubt that probably means, in fact, I'm pretty certain it does from the evidence I've seen, quite a lot of bunching in the top grades when people have had 3 or 4 years experience in post. And that's the question that I'm asking, is does that really work for us as well as we would like?
I think broadly it does. I think what we have to do is keep looking at the market. So keep looking at where we pay in relation to whether it's senior managers, whether it's our lowest grade posts, whether it's leadership posts, team managers, etc., as well as all our specialist roles, social workers, engineers, etc. There's a whole range of things that we could do, and we do have choices. You're absolutely right. Arguably, the 3 or 4 point, progression is about being time served, and that's very traditional in local government. Some authorities have moved away to perhaps single points. There are huge disadvantages with that, because where's the incentive when you're stuck on that single point? I mentioned performance related pay or contribution based pay that we've looked at before. We did look, as part of the pay work that we did a couple of years ago, about the potential for overlapping grades. And there are all sorts of combinations that we can do, but we have to look at the overall cost, and we have to look at what we kind of have to pay to be competitive in the market, and to make sure that we recruit and we retain the best quality people, but not at any cost. You're absolutely right. We do get bunching. There is a positive with that, because we have a lot of people that stay with us for a long time, and they go up to the top of the grades. And you're right, the next step beyond that, unless we restructure, is a promotion. So people do get anchored, if you like, at the top of a grade. And we do have situations where, for example, got some heads of service on grade 17, they want to expand what they do. They're not going to get paid any more than grade 17, because the next grade is an assistant director grade. So there are it doesn't limit what we can do, but it limits it in pay terms. So there are all sorts of dynamics around it, Byron.
Yeah, that's what worries me, the pay terms, because as people build up experience, and very often don't wish to change the scope of the job by taking on responsibilities they don't feel quite so well qualified to discharge, or which would take their time away from the work which they're particularly good at doing. They have no alternative but to accept this sort of ceiling on their pay because it's capped in the grade. And I wonder, therefore, if it provides sufficient incentive to carry on improving and to, or is it just a source of annoyance to people?
I don't think it's a major problem. I think we can evidence that in terms of a low level of turnover, and we could analyse that by different grades. We've got, I'm not going to name names for obvious reason, but I can think of plenty of examples of people who've willingly taken on more, some of that short term through COVID, some of that, long term, in terms of roles broadening as we've reduced, numbers of senior managers and leaders. And people have very willingly taken on more and expanded their portfolios, stepped out of their comfort zones, managed services and teams that are outside their professional backgrounds, if you like. And I suppose it comes back to all the things that Caroline's put in that report that we have been delivering and will try and deliver in the people strategy, which you need to take holistically in terms of organizational performance and then individual performance, individual motivation, culture, ethos, etc. So rather than just looking at pay, but I completely understand where you're coming from, try and look at it all more holistically.
Well, it would be quite a change, of course, were we to start to go down that road and need considerable discussion, not least, of course, with the trade unions as well. And a great deal of thinking about, but I wouldn't be averse to doing it. Although perhaps at this moment, with all the other pressures on us, it's not a good time to do it. I'm raising it as an issue, but not one which is an urgent issue. I appreciate that, and I think other members might take a similar view, but one that in the future we might think about, because no system of organisational pay or anything else ever stays quite still, does it? It always has to evolve. And don't forget, we have over the years reduced our headcount quite considerably as we've become more productive, and particularly with the advent of information technology, which has taken, if I could put it this way, some of the drudgery out of a job, recording information and so on, which is often done automatically because the IT systems, collect the information more easily. So it's enriched the jobs, a lot of the jobs, and made them, in many ways, more professional.
Absolutely.
I wonder if our systems have really caught up with that. Well, these are things I leave in the air at the moment, but I may well return to them in the future. Should I be a chairman of Employment Committee in the future? One never knows with these matters. But there you are. Does anybody else want to contribute? Yes, Mr. Shepherd, you were there shortly before Mrs. Newton. Mr. Shepherd, I can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry, Chairman, beg your pardon. You posed a question which I think Gordon was going to respond to about councillors' role.
Oh, well, they've dodged that. They've dodged that. I was going to let that.
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd.
Beg your pardon?
Thank you, Mr. Shepherd. Political leadership. Absolutely sits in the leadership box. That's my simple answer.
Really? Right. Okay.
Thank you.
Right, Mrs. Newton. Right. I can't hear you. Can't hear you, Mrs. Newton.
I need to unmute, sorry.
Yes, right you are. Yeah.
It's really Appendix B at page 67, Children and Families. It's redundancies are suggested that your mid-consultations is the next step, and there's going to be 15 redundancies. Could we have some information on that, please? Thank you.
Page, which is it?
Page 67.
Page 67.
That's the last report, isn't it?
No,
around action plans.
Report, I think.
Sorry?
you're on to another report.
That's the last item.
Yes, sorry, we'll get to that.
Well, when we get there,
Right. All right. Well, we're recommended to approve this now.
Yes,
So are we all content to do that?
yes.
That's an agreement by consensus. Right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Gordon.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we'll move on then to the next item, which is our old friend, attendance management. And Andrea's around, I suppose.
I am.
Take us through.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Right, off you go.
Thank you. So, as has been stated, this is a regular report to Employment Committee, and this report is as of the end of November. So on page 45, the table which goes on to page 46 details the figures at the end of the last 5 years and the 2 quarters of 2021 and November, and we're in a good position at this point. All of the departments have either made reductions or they've stayed below the 7.5 target that we've set for the council. Obviously, in terms of the LCC total, we are moving down gradually and steadily, progressively towards that 7.5 target. And obviously, we're continuing to make efforts to get there. So good progress overall. Moving into reasons for absence, it's similar reasons that we usually and we see most times that I bring this report. Stress, mental health, depression is at the top, but there is a slight reduction. We talked about cancer cases previously. Again, we've seen another small increase in the amount of cancer cases, which is possible to speculate that might be due to possible delays in treatment at the moment. I can't prove that, but it's possible to speculate, as I say. Again, we see COVID-19 in our top reasons for time lost. I'm sure that will stay there for a while longer, but hopefully we'll see that starting to reduce over the next few quarters. Moving into changing trends, which moves on to the next page as well. At the last committee in December, we talked about these changing trends that we'd started to identify at the beginning of the pandemic period. We'd seen those trends and we'd seen them continue. And this is really an analysis of those trends at this point, at the end of November, and really those trends have continued, and I've just given a bit of analysis so you can see the strength of them. So as we can see, back, neck, musculoskeletal, gastro illness are all significantly lower than the same periods for the previous year. We can also see reductions in viral and cough, cold, flu sickness. It's possible to speculate that some of these changes are due to the lockdowns that we've experienced and also the social distancing, which has kept all of the types of germs that usually spread these things from mixing between us. But maybe also due to the fact that we've temporarily closed services or reduced services, maybe people have had more time to rest pre-existing conditions, or maybe they haven't moved around as much and had accidents that maybe they would have had. Again, I'm speculating, but possibly some of that has happened. We've also seen time lost due to stress, mental health, depression over the pandemic period being lower than previous period last year. Obviously, we've talked previously about our support for wellbeing, and we've done a huge amount of work during the last year on wellbeing. We've had a really positive wellbeing offer before, and we've brought a previous report around wellbeing, and that will and has been continuing. I'd mentioned cancer previously, but as I say, we've seen that there has been this slight increase in the time lost due to cancer. Obviously, I'm continuing to monitor the trends that we've seen. I'm monitoring the levels of absence overall, and obviously I will report to Employment Committee any changes that I see, and any changes that we see, we will target the resources that we have for attendance management to make sure we support individuals and that we make sure that we manage absence to achieve the targets that we've set. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Andrea, for that. Just a couple of observations. I read, because I follow, obviously, the COVID debate very avidly, as most of us do, that the incidence of flu and colds, as I think you referred to, has dropped to almost, well, certainly the lowest for many years, almost almost eliminated flu in some areas. And yet the numbers that we see reporting here was very similar to previous years. I mean, it is dropped a bit to 5.4%, but it's been a sort of in the 5s and just 6% for quite a long time. So we don't seem to have quite followed that trend, do we?
In terms of the amount, I think in terms of the percentage for the quarters, that is as a percentage of the type of absence compared to all the other types of absence.
Well, I mean, the question to me is whether people really sort of are good judges of what's really wrong with them, you know, as it were. You know, I don't feel very well. Well, okay, I've got a bit of a cough or a bit of a cold, you know, or maybe it's a touch of flu, you know, but is it?
I think when we've looked at the pandemic period, we have seen much less cough, cold, flu absence reported in terms of instances of absence. There has been a lot less this year. I have done some analysis with particular teams that have seen specific or much stronger reductions in that type of absence. And from speaking to the managers in those areas, what they have reported is that people have been catching less and actually have been less unwell this year, which makes me believe that it's due to community interaction, because it's not just about how we're working, it's about the fact that we're not getting very close to each other and we're not passing those germs around. And this will be something that we'll need to monitor as we start to change, because that will happen going forward. We'll start to change how we interact.
Well, it could be that, but I mean, I'm just wondering how people think about these things when they're reporting that they are unwell. And the same thing with stress and depression and mental health. We're told in the papers that large numbers of people are suffering a great deal more than they used to do because of the lockdowns and so on and isolation. And yet those figures are very similar to what we've been noticing amongst our staff, in fact, for many years. So not much change there either. So it's looking at the balance of it, there's hardly any change anywhere. But overall, of course, we're getting less reported, that's something we should be pleased about. You know, down below the 7.5 days, that is our target figure. Right, I've said enough. Who have we got first? I've got Mrs. Newton with a hand up. Mrs. Broadley was trying to get in at one point. Have I overlooked you for some reason, or has your hand come up and gone down again? I can't hear you. No.
For some reason, my hand won't stay up.
Oh, I see. You want to speak?
Trying.
Well, let you come first. I did notice it.
Well.
I did notice it. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I tried on the last item. The coughs and colds and flu thing, I think, is as you say, is because of social distancing. But I think it's also made a big difference. People wearing masks that have done it. Do you feel that this could continue during the COVID pandemic, that these levels will come down even further?
Andrea, come on.
From looking at, I have access to live information from our payroll system, which records our absence. Obviously, this is our November position. The figures are still improving day on day. I think that they will continue to improve. I think what is the unknown to me is whether or not or how things will change once we return to not having to social distance, because I think the impact of social distancing and this people not spreading germs between them is yet to be seen. I think obviously we will still be doing a level of remote working, which has benefits, but I think in terms of the community interaction, I think that has, to my mind, had an impact on our attendance, because it has reduced the amount of absence that people have had, because it stopped them getting unwell.
Yeah.
Can I come back on that just a minute? If you take, for instance, a care home, if you've got coughs and colds or sickness and diarrhea, you are recommended to stay away from work for 48 hours. The fact that people not so much in care homes, obviously, are working from home in an office or whatever, do you feel that has had an impact? Because if I've got sickness and diarrhea, I might feel inclined to work from home, but I wouldn't feel inclined to come into an office. So the fact that people might have some illnesses, but feel able to work from home on the computer rather than make the effort to come into an office.
Yes, that will be a factor which we will be able to continue to benefit from going forward. Yes.
Thank you.
Could I just really briefly add?
Perhaps we should welcome that, because that will cheer them up, because nothing like work to cheer you up, is it?
Could I just add one really brief point? I think the same argument possibly applies around stress, mental health and depression. And I think, Byron, you made the absolute point around, what's in the media. And these stats just show the number of people, the percentage of people who are off sick. But obviously we're concerned from a wellbeing perspective around the whole workforce, and we will have lots of colleagues who are struggling with their mental health and wellbeing, who are managing to continue to work, who may not have done so if they were going into the office 5 days a week, for example, just to keep it simple.
Yeah. Well, the late Theodore Roosevelt, not someone I knew personally, of course, had a saying. He said, "The best prize that life has to offer is the chance to work hard at work worth doing." I always thought it was quite an uplifting statement. Right, Mrs. Newton. I can't hear you. You're muted still. You're muted. You're muted.
Yes,
Right, got you now.
It's just a question on short-term days lost. It's the Corporate Resources Department. They seem to have a very high level of individual occurrences. Is there any specific reason why that should be happening? Thank you.
You got that, Andrea?
Yes, I'm just looking at the figure. It's possibly, I would need to go back and look at the raw data. My gut feeling is school food is within
right.
corporate resources.
Yes.
So it may be,
yes.
School food is a large workforce.
That would make us
and obviously, as has already been mentioned, it's a similar environment. If there is a sickness diarrhea bug, they do need to take a period of time off and aren't able to go into the kitchen if they have that. So it could be that.
That sounds plausible. Yeah.
I think school food workforce is about half of corporate resources workforce, isn't it? Something like that.
It is.
Yes. Yeah. It's quite a lot of people. Yeah. Although many of them will be part-timers, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Anybody else on this subject? Well, thank you. No, there isn't. So, Andrea, thank you for that, an update. I mean,
thank you.
It's obviously an unusual report because of the circumstances we're in, and of course we'll keep this going because it's a topic which we can never leave. We've got to improve attendance if we could further improve productivity, and it's something we've always got to be mindful of. So thank you for the work you do on this, and then we'll see another report at the next meeting, another update. So we are down to note this report. Are we happy to do that? Yes. Right, okay. That takes us then to item 8. And this is the update and new report on the gender pay gap. So this one is who?
That's me, Chair.
Oh, yes, Sarah. Hi.
Yeah, yes. Thank you. So the report you have in front of you is to present the reports for our gender pay gap reporting as at the 31st of March 2020. You'll probably recall that gender pay gap reporting is a statutory requirement under the Equality Act 2010, and that this is the 4th year that we have been required to publish these results. We are required to publish the information by the 30th of March 2021, and whilst last year the requirement to report results was waived in response to the first national lockdown, we did actually continue to submit our results, as did a number of other local authorities. The results this year show a continued positive reduction in the mean hourly rate, which now shows that females are paid 10% lower than males, and the median rate has also further reduced, which is now at 4% lower than males, and that's been a continued trend since we first started reporting 4 years ago. The report also demonstrates that there has been a continued increase in the number of women occupying senior roles within the council. We continue to run a number of programmes to promote female representation and inclusion. We will continue to celebrate International Women's Day in March, albeit virtually, and the successful Springboard and Spring Forward programmes have continued to operate in the virtual environment, picking up a question that was raised earlier in the People Strategy report. We currently have 26 participants on the Springboard programme and a new Spring Forward programme. The applications for that are coming in at the moment, and that will commence in March. Also to note that our policy on supporting employees through the menopause was highly commended at the Public Sector People Management Awards in September last year as well. At the time of writing the report, there were no upper tier local authorities that had submitted their data for this year. So I wasn't able to include any comparison information in the report. Again, that's probably likely as a result of the pandemic. Although having checked in this last week, I can see that Newcastle City Council have now published their data, and just by way of comparison, their mean figure stands at 2.9% and their median figure at 5.8%. That's really all I've got to say by way of introduction, but happy to take any questions.
Right, could I just comment on this? Because I've always been slightly sceptical about the use of the statistics here, because I think there is an automatic trend here, as we employ more and more females, and overall we're about 3/4 of our workforce is female at the moment. But increasingly the proportions are becoming more female in the higher ranks, as it were, and the younger graduates become senior practitioners, become senior managers, and so on. And you can see this sort of progression, can't you, through the grades. So at the moment, our upper quartile, grade 10 onwards, is 66% are female out of our workforce, compared with the group below that, which is the grades 8 and 10, which is 73, 6 to 8, 70, and of course right up the bottom groups, it's 80%. It flips the other way because those are the sort of jobs which are relatively unskilled, which are by their nature and so on seem to attract females. The school food, for example, is one of those areas possibly, but as more and more of our really senior people become posts are occupied by females, we will flip. First of all, I suppose the median will go down to 0, and then it will be followed probably quite slowly by the mean, gradually dropping further. Am I right in that analysis?
By and large, yes. There is, some organisations are already reporting a negative or a positive gender pay gap, I should say, that women are actually receiving more pay than men in organisations. Although I know in the past when we've looked at some of their data, we have been a little bit sceptical about that actual data and how it's been presented. But yes, there will be, I think there's a couple of things to point out really, that yes, there is still some occupational gender bias. So you've mentioned school food as one area. So that does have an impact. But as we said, that the positive action programs that we've been taking, particularly to encourage women into leadership positions, and we've had that conversation about leadership already this morning, but those have been successful. And really what we're aiming for is to have equality of pay across the grades. Yeah. And that's really what we're aiming for ultimately.
Yes, I mean, when we look at the very senior people, I mean, okay, our chief executive is there permanently, of course, but if you go down a grade, the grades below that on directors, how many directors have we got of females? Is it 2 or 3 now?
3.
How many is it? 3, is it?
3. Yeah.
2?
What,
3.
yeah.
3. We've got Lauren, Jane and Anne.
Oh yeah.
That's right. Long Jane and Anne. Yeah. So we're very nearly sort of getting to par there, aren't we? And then the assistant directors are coming up fast as well, and then the heads of function and so on. So be interested to see how long it takes us to get there, because that will be quite an interesting point of time, won't it?
Yeah, it's really around where we start to see more of a balance, because I can see some of the raw data behind the report is around grade 16, 17 is where we start to see more of a balance in terms of men and women in those grades, but there continues to be more men than women in grade 15 and those higher level positions.
Yeah.
Still some way to go.
Yes.
There's still some way to go. Anyone else want to make any comments? No. So are we happy to? Well, I think we note it, don't we? And thank you very much, Sarah, for compiling it for us. Okay.
No, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Let me move on to item 9, which is the equal pay audit. Is this Mark's?
It is, Chair.
Yes, right, okay.
Thank you very much. Yes, hopefully this kind of follows on quite nicely from the gender pay gap document, the report that you've just read. So perhaps just to set out perhaps some of the differences maybe on that first between the two. So as you've heard and as you know, the gender pay gap is a statutory function that we need to do, and there are some set calculations in terms of mean and median and splitting it into pay scales into quartiles. This, however, an equal pay audit is something that we isn't mandatory to do, but we're doing it because we think it's good practice. and we're doing it to look at more detail, not just across gender, but other characteristics as well, and see if we can kind of look across our broader workforce in terms of age as well, and other characteristics. See if we can make some assumptions or rationales for terms of the way in which people are paid across those different characteristics. And it's paragraph 2 of the report. You can see that what this does, even though it's kind of mandatory, it does help the organisation make sure that we comply with our public sector equality duty as well, to provide some internal reassurance that actually we are helping to eliminate discrimination and advance equality of opportunity and foster good relationships as well. So that's kind of some of the rationale for why we did it. And paragraph 4 kind of gives a bit of detail in terms of the background of it. So what we did is we kind of looking at different range of staff demographics, looking obviously identifying that against a bit more detail in terms of the different pay rates that we talked about earlier. And the Equality and Human Rights Commission recommends that any gaps of say 3% plus or minus, a swing either way, is deemed to be acceptable. Which is their terminology, and anything kind of swing of 5 or should be reviewed and monitored. And if we get into the methodology then as to what we actually did, we looked at all the individuals paid on our main pay grade structure. We excluded those on the different pay spines because obviously it's difficult to make a comparison across the different pay spines such as teachers and Salisbury pay spines. So we kind of focused on the majority of our staff, and there's a total there of 4,755 posts that we looked at in terms of the audit. And we also looked at salary payments over a full 12 months period as well. So we did exclude anybody where they'd left partway through the year, for example, just so we can have a real good base of data and a consistent base of data for looking at trying to draw in some conclusions. And as section 8, paragraph 8 of the report says that when we looked at it, we could actually draw some conclusions on gender and of age, but it was difficult to make some other decisions on other characteristics, and that was due to some of the self-disclosure rates of our staff, and that comes up as an action point a little bit later on, as that is something that we do need to work on and improve to help us identify these gaps in the future. So if I skip on to the main findings of it, paragraph 10, our examination of basic pay identified a pay gap of 0.1%, which, as I kind of mentioned earlier, the swing of plus or minus 3% was being reasonable. I think 0.1% gives us as a fairly close figure to zero as good as being a zero. So hopefully that kind of gives us and hopefully yourselves and the committee some great reassurance that actually there's no evidence, I guess, of definitely kind of sex or age-based pay discrimination. It also kind of helps reassure us that the Hay evaluation scheme, as kind of Gordon mentioned earlier, continues to ensure that is also working well, and kind of make sure that people are being paid on the duties and the rationale and the skills that they have rather than on anything else. However, as mentioned in paragraph 11, that we did then start to look into some additional allowances, and we did see there's potentially some issues there, particularly kind of regarding gender. And I guess come back to the gender pay gap with the point about maybe some gender occupations or some occupations which are perhaps more balanced in one gender rather than the other. That was probably when we looked into that was the rationale for that. So, for example, the example given in the report is things like posts in waste operations and highways where kind of the majority of staff are male, and that accounts for the different balance of the payments. And I have given some details there in paragraph 12 in the table just to break that down, and you can see there the different types of payments we looked at, the split of individuals who received one payment, at least the minimum one payment over that 12-month period that was there, and some of the differences in that kind of female and male split. And you can see, for example, we've got standby payments. If I take that one out of the middle, you can see kind of in terms of the posts that received it, 7% of posts were male and only 1% was female. So you can see kind of where that's probably one of our biggest differences, perhaps, in terms of that gender split with standby payments. And then what we have done, I guess, in regards to standby is we actually are now kind of we have introduced a new policy on standby payments, which kind of hopes it gives a clearer framework in terms of how they are determined and how they are paid to people, and that kind of will help reduce any potential inconsistencies that were there. Helps provide, I guess, a greater clarity and framework for people to make those decisions. So I guess the conclusion that I'd like to present to the committee is that the audit that we completed hopefully presents a great deal of reassurance that actually as a council we continue to provide fair pay to our employees. We have a couple of actions that we will pick up to ensure that continues. One of those is about, say, self-disclosure. As I mentioned earlier, it is vitally important that staff do disclose some of their personal characteristics so that we can do this analysis, and we're looking at that again when we launch our new Oracle Fusion system, and that contains the data that we hold about individuals. And also we'll come back and review this equal pay audit in the future as well, and come back to an employment committee with some refreshed data in terms of the impact of those actions that we've taken, and hopefully note the progress that we've made with those as well. So the recommendation there is to note the findings of the audit and some of our future actions that we set out. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. Just one or two questions that I have. I mean, clearly with the figure coming out on the audit is minus 0.104%, which is obviously as near to zero as you can reasonably get it. With an allowance of plus or minus 3% being regarded as okay, it's quite gratifying. I mean, there's some anecdotal evidence that in some of our pay we're having to provide special payments, which are referred to in the report. And I was asked about providing extra payments for social workers in the school sector. And I'm not sure what the gender balance is there, but I did wonder, because the cohort's about 70 strong, and that could have an effect on figures. But I was assured there wasn't a problem there, and Gordon perhaps will reassure me in a moment that I was right in that assumption. Just one other thing, it might be an odd thing to ask, but when you're looking at such small amounts of data as you appear to be sometimes having to on this now, and making sure that we're all right on this, what do you do with transgender people?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. I'm not sure if we have any individuals who have identified as transgender, to be honest with you. I think if they did, you're right there, they would be a small proportion of the workforce that is there. And you're right, it is difficult to include some of that data. So I can see Sarah's got a hand up, and I think she might be able to
Sarah might like to come in and just advise us on that one. What do you think?
Yeah. Yes, I can advise on that one. It's because the numbers of people in the organisation who have declared as transgender are so small that we might be able to identify them, so we don't include them in the report.
Oh, I see. Well, that's reasonable. Yeah, okay, thank you for that. Right, anyone else? Ah, yes, Mrs. Broadley. Yes, managed to keep her hand up this time. No, you.
Thank you.
You're okay.
You were talking about standby payments. Is that down to the gender of the people that would get that payment, i.e. somebody for gritting might be on standby and things like that, and highways, which tend to be, as you've said, male, that would get a standby payment rather than somebody in a school kitchen wouldn't get a standby payment. So is that why there is a big difference there?
Absolutely, yeah. That is one of those down to the occupations that have those payments related to them. And yeah, they are kind of quite broad in terms we don't have many posts, I guess, and many areas that require that payment to be made. And yeah, unfortunately, that they are one of the ones which you can see a significant, perhaps, gender gap in terms of the occupants of those posts.
Okay. So you're speaking, but I can't hear you, Mrs. Broadley.
Sorry, the microphone went on again. So that's not likely to change because of the nature of the work and the standby that's given?
I think it depends, I guess, on the nature of demand that's also coming through for those posts. I think what our policy tries to do, and our new policy tries to do, is ensure that those payments are being made in a fairer way as possible, and that there is a good solid process behind it. I guess we will see that as that starts to come out, whether that actually has made a difference to the gender pay gap, to the gender of the allowances that are being paid to them. Well, I think that they're one of the things that we will see, I think, when we come back and start to review the data that is there, and that's one of the things that we'll start to examine and see whether it has made an impact and has made a difference, or if it is actually something that is related to the occupations and has been done in a consistent manner. But at least what we're doing is providing a framework for those.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, Gordon, you wanted to come back on the points I think I made. Yeah,
it was, yeah, Byron, thanks. It was just around market premium, which obviously we haven't included in this. Well, we've included it in the report, but I think the business case for a market premium payment in some ways is set separate to this, in that we're looking at the market. It's less about the makeup of that particular group, although obviously we'll monitor it. But the defence against any equal pay claim around market premium absolutely goes back to the strength of the business case, what's happening in the market, why we have to make that payment, because we know those payments can be divisive when we're making them to some groups of staff and not others who perhaps class themselves as being in similar posts. So that's why, and again, we talked about level 3 social workers this week. That's why we make sure that the business cases are very robust before they're considered and approved.
Yes, I know, because we'd certainly had quite a discussion about that. All right, well, that's reassuring anyway. I mean, clearly the business case has to trump this particular issue, because it's important to get the work done and to have sufficient people to do it and maintain the service offer. Right, thank you very much, Mark, for all that. I think we're just, we will note what you say, and well, no more than that. Recommendations are that we... right, recommended findings of the equal pay audit, particularly the currently job evaluation system, it continues to ensure that pay is determined on an equal basis. We could agree that, I think. That additional payments such as honoraria and premium payments will continue to be reviewed regularly to ensure that such payments are still justified and do not discriminate. Well, we've talked about that. And that a further report on equal pay will be sent to the Employment Committee within 3 years, so a long time before you see you again, Mark, for this rate. So are we all happy with that? Yes, thank you very much.
Yes.
Okay, now we're on to the last report, which is item 10, which is Anna. Yes, am I right?
You are, yes, sorry.
Yeah, yes.
Mr. Rhodes, I hadn't got my mic on. Yes, last report is down to me. This is the report that we receive at every meeting, setting out the level of compulsory redundancies that are progressing or have progressed. Appendix A shows those action plans that have been implemented and completed where compulsory redundancies have been made. There are 2 in there currently, which is the Children and Family Services Department at Welland House, and also Corporate Resources for the Food Court. Appendix B shows those where there's implementation underway of the action plan, and that's progressing at the moment. That again is Children and Families, and it's a Special Educational Needs Assessment team that's being looked at there, and that's mid-consultation currently.
Yeah, okay, well, this sort of work continues, and there's a lot of uncertainty about the future here as a result of COVID and new ways of working and so on. We'll have to see what eventually transpires. Are we happy to note that? Yes. In which case, we've now completed our agenda. Thank you all very much indeed. Let's go and have some coffee. Meeting closed.
I'll just confirm in a moment that the webcast has stopped. If we just